He's already fulfilled one big campaign pledge. He's withdrawn the USA from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Well done, Donald, is what I say. And later on in the show, I'll tell you what that deal was really all about. But first, Prime Minister May 4 times yesterday dodged a question on whether she knew that a Trident nuclear missile had malfunctioned ahead of a parliamentary debate and vote on a £40 billion renewal of Trident. 4 times she was asked this question and she refused to answer. In fact, what she said was, I have absolute faith. Let's listen, actually. Let's listen exactly to how our Prime Minister responded.
Did you know that misfire had occurred?
Well, I have absolute faith in our Trident missiles. When I made that speech in the House of Commons, what we were talking about was whether or not we should renew our Trident, whether or not we should have Trident missiles, an independent nuclear deterrent in the future.
Did you know that it did happen?
I think we should defend our country. I think we should play our role in NATO with an independent nuclear deterrent. Jeremy Corbyn thinks differently. Jeremy Corbyn thinks we shouldn't defend our country.
This is a very serious incident. Did you know about it when you told the House of Commons?
And the issue that we were talking about in the House of Commons was a very serious issue. It was about whether or not we should renew Trident, whether we should look to the future and have a replacement Trident. That's what we were talking about in the House of Commons. That's what the House of Commons voted for. I believe in defending our country. Jeremy Corbyn voted against it. He doesn't want to defend our country with an independent nuclear deterrent.
Prime Minister, did you know?
There are tests that take place all the time regularly for our nuclear deterrents. What we were talking about in that debate that took place was about
I'm not going to get an answer.
Well, it wasn't quite as epic as Jeremy Paxman, if you remember, years ago with Michael Howard, when 14 times he asked him, did you sack Derek Lewis? And didn't get an answer, but it was pretty similar. So let's just remind ourselves, we're talking about our submarine HMS Vengeance. It had just been through a very significant refit. It was out in Florida. And they were testing. They were testing the submarine. They were testing all the updates on it. They were testing the personnel and the crew to make sure that things were absolutely right. And don't forget, we have 4 of these submarines. That's what makes up Britain's nuclear deterrent. And they were also testing a slightly new system on the missile itself. And it went wrong. It started to veer in the wrong direction. Now, what's interesting about this is we don't know exactly the date of this, but it's in or around the time of the Brexit referendum. What we don't know is why was a decision made not to tell people this had happened. Because the previous time we tested one of these missiles was unbelievably 4 years earlier, and 4 years earlier the Royal Navy actually released a promotional video to show how effective our nuclear deterrent was. And I wonder, did the British government not talk about this because they were embarrassed, because they thought actually it would weaken us as a nation with a nuclear deterrent, or perhaps, and this is interesting, because Trident, whilst we call it an independent nuclear deterrent, actually we can't use it without the Americans. Did the Americans tell us to keep this quiet? Either way, Mr Corbyn predictably has been saying we must have a serious discussion on it. Nicola Sturgeon has called it a hugely serious issue. But there is a question not just about what's happened in the last 24 hours and Mrs May's responses to Andrew Marr. There is perhaps a bigger question. Is it right that sometimes our leaders cannot tell us the truth for reasons of national security or whatever it may be? Or is that argument an excuse actually for leaders to never tell us the truth? You decide. You let me know what you think. To get involved, call me on 0345 6060 973. Text me at 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC. But don't forget the hashtag Farage on LBC. And, of course, you can watch us live on LBC's Facebook page. Is it right that sometimes our leaders cannot tell us the truth? Well, perhaps I'm going to surprise you a bit here, because you probably think I'm always going to slag off every politician and every leader, always. I think there are circumstances in which leaders cannot tell the truth. And I suspect that a trial with our nuclear deterrent not going quite as it should have been is something that a government perhaps has every reason not to advertise. Whether it could have been handled better by the Prime Minister is another question. So a big debate here. Do leaders have that right? I wonder what Martin in Barnet thinks of that question.
Hello there. Good evening to you, Nigel. And
Good evening.
may I say, keep up the good work you're doing for the country.
Well, thank you, Martin, but talk to me about prime ministers.
It's not in the public interest. What the public don't know keeps them happy. You can't go around saying that what we've got, the big stuff that we're firing around the world, is gone wrong. We're not to know this. It makes us happy thinking it's all working absolutely perfect. And for a reporter to push the Prime Minister, who is the head of government, to push the Prime Minister in the way he did about this subject, it's nothing to... He shouldn't be doing that. He's just trying to get ratings. It's not his place to do that.
Well, a journalist is allowed to ask the question, clearly. I mean, I wouldn't criticise him. I wouldn't criticise him for that. I mean, perhaps Mrs May could have handled it differently. But, I mean, Martin, I'm basically with you on this. I think there are issues of national security that you don't advertise because it wouldn't be in our interest to do so. But, I mean, what if, for example, the government knew that its finances were significantly worse than we'd recently been told? You could make an argument, well, if we advertise that, you know, it might stop foreign and direct investment coming into Britain. I mean, would it be reasonable for a government not to tell us the truth about the economy?
Well, it's a different matter. It's not security of the country. And as I said before, if it's Trident, this is the stuff that we think protects us. And if we know it's not right, then we don't sleep easy. We all sleep easy when we know there's something bigger looking over us and looking down upon us, and it's all good. Now, to do with... I actually tried to call you last week on a subject, and if I may, it's to do with Donald Trump. And do you mind me asking you a question?
It'll have to be 10 seconds, Martin. Go on.
OK. Are we safe with Donald Trump heading the world's superpower?
Believe you me, Martin, Donald Trump is not a neocon. Hillary Clinton was the neocon. Hillary Clinton supported wars all over the place. Trump says you only intervene if there's a really good reason for doing so. I think we're much safer in terms of global security with Trump than we would have been with Clinton. But more of Trump a little bit later on. Martin, thank you for your view. Very clear. Security and economics are different things. It's right, perhaps for a Prime Minister, not to tell us everything. Neil, Watford Gap. Neil, tell us, has Mrs May done the right thing here?
She absolutely has. As an 18-year-old apprentice, Nigel, in 1978, I joined one of the UK's defence industries. I'm still actually in the defence industry 38 years later. And one of the first things you do on day one is you sign the Official Secrets Act. And there's an undertaking in there that says, I understand that where I gain access to or am entrusted with official information in whatever form or by whatever means, it is my duty to continue to protect that information. Now, I still work with people who are involved in the Trident submarine programme. And what I would say is that these people are protecting us 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. They are there basically operating stealth. Nobody knows where they are. Even they don't know where they are. And I think it was absolutely right for Theresa May to not answer that question. We don't need to know.
So Neil, tell me, how would you respond to Nicola Sturgeon, who has said there should be full disclosure of what happened, who knew what, when, and why the House of Commons wasn't told? How do you respond to Nicola Sturgeon?
Basically, she's delusional about all kinds of things. She's playing to her own SNP home crowd that she doesn't want Trident up in Scotland, even though it actually gives a lot of jobs there, to be honest. So, and the fact is, you know, I can't remember the name of the American president who said, walk softly and carry a big stick. Trident basically buys us a place at the UN Security Council. It means that rogue regimes like Iran and North Korea can't threaten us. And it's absolutely right that the media, and I think in particular the BBC has to get a mention here. The BBC are absolutely wrong to press the Prime Minister on a matter of state security. And I must be honest, I feel very passionate about that.
No, Neil, I get that absolutely loud and clear. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Your texts and tweets coming in. Text, this should be secret. We never hear of Russia's failed tests. And these are tests. Yes, that's right. The whole point of testing things that are new is to find out, or at least have been altered, is to find out whether they work or not. I very much agree with that. A tweet here, I don't think announcing to the world that your nuclear defence has failed is a wise thing to do. Another tweet, yes, for national security, we should not be told everything. Thus far, virtually everybody says that the government has a right, when it's a time of national security, not to tell us everything. And that is absolutely, firmly my view, but I'm obviously very interested and very keen to hear from those of you who think, actually, the government should have told us. Anthony in Wimbledon, what do you think?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I think that was a masterful display of politics on how not to answer a direct question, which is a yes or no answer, skillfully asked by a very good journalist. But I think personally, my opinion about Theresa May is that she is a public servant. She's the premier public servant, and she has a duty to at least answer a very simple question: did you know? It's not like saying, what are the codes to our nuclear bombs? It's, did you know about it? It's a very simple question. The way she wiggled around it, I think, puts her in a bad position.
So would it have been, Anthony, would it have been right not to tell us initially, although she wasn't PM at the time, to be fair, Mr. Cameron, remember him? He was. But would it then, once it's leaked out, you think at that point she should have held her hands up and said yes?
Well, it would have saved a lot of egg on the face, and everyone's talking about it now, and now it's a case of crisis management, isn't it, about what they're going to say next, because everyone's going to ask that question all over again.
Anthony,
but remember, she's a public servant. Let's get her to answer her questions when we ask them.
Anthony, you've made one very, very good, powerful point here, that actually things perhaps are worse than they needed to be. Remember, you can watch this show live. Go to LBC's Facebook page now. Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It's 7:15. The Prime Minister would not answer the question, did she know that a nuclear missile had somewhat misfired during tests? I'll tell you the oddest thing about this, to me, watching it yesterday, was that she sort of appeared to be surprised by the question, a little bit nonplussed in terms of how she dealt with it. I mean, it was on the front page of the Sunday Times, and I find that really very, very strange. Your Facebook messages chunking in. Nathan Mercer says, not everything should be in the public domain. Alan Richards says, it has to be on a need-to-know basis. We do not need to know what went wrong in this test. David St John says, the government shouldn't have told us. Lewis Hart says, life is a game of cards. It would be unwise to show your hand to the world. Well, at the moment, it's wall-to-wall that the government didn't need to tell us. But let me give you a different point of view on this whole episode that I think actually is rather interesting. And it's given by Admiral Lord West. He was our first Sea Lord about 10 years ago. He sits in the House of Lords as a Labour peer. And he makes the point that actually there was no point in covering this up. This was a test. It was a submarine that had been through a refit. They were testing the submarine. They were testing a missile with a slightly new system. They were testing the staff on board. The whole point about testing things is to find out what bits don't work. And Admiral West makes the point that when it emerged through the Sunday Times that this had happened, given that actually directly this incident did not threaten national security and was nothing to be embarrassed about because they were fine-tuning this to get it right, that by not answering those questions yesterday, what Theresa May has done is turn this into a complete media storm and made things worse for herself because actually it didn't matter. And the man that was the first Sea Lord says, look, of course things go wrong sometimes when you're testing new systems, but that he has absolute total confidence in Trident as a system, and thinks the £40 billion we're investing in renewing it is the right thing to do. So there are some, and Lord West I think is foremost among them, who are saying, actually, Prime Minister, you've made this a whole lot worse. It wasn't really, in this case, a matter of national security. But I'm asking you, in fact, a broader question than just about this incident. I'm asking you, is it right that sometimes our leaders cannot tell us the truth? And I wonder what Peter in Wimbledon thinks about that question.
Thank you for taking the call, Nigel, once again. A very, very rare occasion, I agree with you on something.
Wow.
And previous callers, I agree as well. What actually harm has been done is that the relationship between the press and us and the Prime Minister has been slightly damaged, because instead of avoiding a very simple question, which wouldn't have done any harm to anyone, she could have just answered yes or no, and that would be done and over with. But I have a slightly bit more awkward question to you, Nigel, because you kind of brought this matter into into forefront, is knowing Mr. Trump personally yourself, how would you see Theresa May kind of succeeding in building a relationship with him, knowing that he is a pathological liar? Because for me, to have any relationship with anyone,
Peter, come on, Peter. The Donald just exaggerates a bit from time to time. That's different from being a pathological liar. Peter, let me answer your question by saying this, that Theresa May flies to the USA on Thursday. She'll be meeting senior senators and congressmen on Capitol Hill on Thursday, and she will have this meeting in the Oval Office. By the way, an Oval Office in which the bust of Churchill is back. And I'm pleased about that because I asked him face to face just 4 days after he was elected whether he'd do it. And Peter, what we will do on Thursday evening is we will discuss the meeting that is coming up on Friday. And I will give you an opinion then, Peter, if I can, on how I think the personal chemistry of Donald Trump and our Prime Minister might work. It's difficult to think of two more different people. So, Peter, we will return to that. But meanwhile, we go to Sheila in Church Langley. Sheila, is it right that sometimes leaders can't tell us the truth? Or did the Prime Minister, in this case, make a complete mess of something that wasn't really a problem?
No, she didn't, Nigel, but she shouldn't have been questioned 3 and 4 times, you know. I mean, when this all happened, Nigel, was way back, you know, when Brexit was happening. It was a very bad time for anything to be disclosed. You've got Jeremy Corbyn totally against Trident, you know. Of course it should have been kept secret. And, I mean, a disaster didn't happen. But what puzzles me, Nigel, if all these people are sworn to secrecy, who leaked it out? And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Nigel, have you had something to do with getting Theresa May in first to see Mr. Trump, which is wonderful?
Right.
And I believe you've had a little something to do with that.
Well, that's very sweet of you. Firstly, Sheila, just to pick up very quickly on your Jeremy Corbyn point, yes, I mean, Corbyn's been very, very critical of all of this. You know, he sort of makes the point, you know, goodness knows what the consequences of all this could have been. Don't forget, Jeremy Corbyn has a different agenda. Jeremy Corbyn does not want us to have an independent nuclear deterrent, so perhaps that's why he's making the arguments that he did. Sheila, I would just say this to you quickly. I mean, when the Prime Minister was confronted with this question, weren't there 2 possible answers? Wasn't one possible answer, thank you, Mr. Marr, it was a test. The fact that a test goes wrong is nothing to be embarrassed about. We wanted to get it right. That's one possible answer, and it's dealt with, and it's finished. The other is, I'm sorry, Mr. Marr, but when it comes to national security, I cannot discuss this with you. Now, if she'd given either of those answers, I do not think we'd have the media storm we've got today. So, Sheila, my point really is that I think she seemed surprised, she seemed nonplussed by this, and I think perhaps she could have handled it better. Would you agree with that point of view?
Maybe a little better, but then again, all politicians, you know, swing things, they tell little fibs and all the rest of it, but they've got to, haven't they, Nigel? If we all knew the truth, you know. I mean, they're saying this now about Trump, telling lies. He's not telling lies, he's just having a little... He's having a bit of... He's just fabricating things a little bit, you know.
Well, I mean, you know, Donald does in The Art of the Deal, you know, make the point that you have to sell your case and sell your pitch, and perhaps you have to over-egg it. Perhaps you have to do it in a style that is, well, to quote him, huge, which is different to being a compulsive liar. Sheila, as far as the meeting's concerned this week, I can't claim credit for it, other than... You know, I have consistently been making the message to Donald Trump's friends and team, who don't need actually to hear it, that this is their greatest friend in the world. And isn't it exciting and isn't it great that she's going to be, within 7 days of him becoming the president, going in to see him? And no British Prime Minister has been to see a US president within 7 days. This is absolutely history-making. It is a fantastic, exciting, wonderful opportunity. And Sheila, I repeat, as I did to the previous caller, we will discuss this on Thursday evening. Sheila, thank you. Facebook messages. David Wales says, yes, we should have Trident. We need that deterrent. Slightly different answer to the question, but I get where you're coming from. Jeremy Corbyn, are you listening? The vast majority of this country do want us to have a nuclear deterrent. Linda Hudson on Facebook says, don't let your enemies know every little thing about your country's weaponry. The old saying should be the new saying. Careless talk costs lives. I get that, Linda, but somebody somebody, and Sheila raised this, somebody leaked this. Somebody presumably, either within the military or the MOD or somewhere, somebody did leak this. And I would have thought that if we caught up with the person that leaked this, we ought to deal with them appropriately. Now, I wonder what Carl in Leighton thinks. Is it right, Carl, that a Prime Minister sometimes simply cannot tell us the truth?
No, I have to disagree, Nigel, actually.
OK.
Thank you very much for having me on. And the reason I say that is very simple. Exactly where do you draw the line if you're deciding to put the power in the hands of anyone else in terms of what you are told and what you aren't? A lot of your callers and people who text in, and this is what inspired me to actually pick up this time around, first-time caller.
Yep. Welcome.
Have basically, thank you, and one of them, I think his name was Martin, said, everyone sleeps better because they know that the state's working along fine and they're protected. Well, if you're ceding control of what you know and what you don't to someone else, then how on earth do you know that everything's fine? And I think it's a ridiculous statement to simply throw out there, I'll give it to someone else. It's sheepish. It's very, very like, follow the motive, follow what you're told. Don't even think about it. There's no independent thought to saying something like that, in my opinion. And
Carl, I do completely get the logic of what you're saying. Because if it's the most important thing in our life, how can we have absolute trust in somebody who might be getting it horribly wrong? And I get that. But, I mean, do remember, Carl, that during the war, there were things that Churchill couldn't say and Churchill couldn't do. I mean, once we'd cracked the Enigma code, we couldn't let the Germans know we'd cracked the code until something really important came along. And, you know, Churchill had to witness convoys going across the Atlantic, knowing that they were going to be attacked, but unable to give the warning for this because he had not to let the Germans know that we cracked this code. So I do think there are times, in the case of national security, when Prime Ministers have to make hellishly tough decisions and where, frankly, they can't tell us the truth. Would you accept, Carl, there are some times when a Prime Minister can't tell the truth?
I was mainly calling to naysay some of your previous callers who I think are far too ready to, you know, chuck away control of their own lives. And if you think that when you're talking about a nuclear deterrent, and indeed hence you're talking about nuclear missiles, again, is the first time you're going to find out there's something wrong with it when one falls on your house?
Yeah. Carl,
and I know that's very unlikely, but you understand the point I'm
Carl,
making.
I get the point. I get the logic. I get the logic of it beautifully. In a moment, I will talk about Trump cancelling this Trans-Pacific Partnership and why he did it and what it stood for. But for now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. Your calls on Is It Right that sometimes the Prime Minister can't tell us the truth. But before we do that, this is the first full day that Donald J. Trump has had in the White House, in the Oval Office, and things are moving at a pace that is almost unbelievable. And one of the first things that he's done, well, he said he's going to slash taxes dramatically. He said he's going to rid America of a whole load of regulations, which is really hurting small and medium-sized businesses. He's talking again about building a big, beautiful wall. But the one executive order that I can see that he signed today is he signed an order to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now, of course, don't forget, we also were in discussion about a transatlantic partnership with the European Union, and he'll probably veto that one tomorrow. What is Trump doing here? Well, he thinks that it is wrong to have trade deals with countries who undercut massively through what they pay their workers, and also, perhaps particularly in the case of China and some others, where actually you're competing against businesses that are being funded by the state. But this Trans-Pacific Partnership was modelled and based on the European Union's single market. The idea was that the European Union was going to be a prototype for a bigger, form of world governance. The Clintons were on it, Obama was on it, and Trump has just reversed it. And just to make it clear, I generally have always thought that if you remove barriers to trade, you can do so to the mutual benefit of both partners involved, provided they're roughly equal countries. But the point about these things is they masquerade as trade deals, and actually they're about harmonisation, homogenisation. They're about playing into the hands of not big business, but giant multinationals at the expense of everybody else. I think Trump has done the right thing. And whether you love him or hate him, believe you me, everything he said in that campaign, everything he said in that 15-minute address that I was there listening to on Friday in Washington, he's going to do every single one of them. Fancy that. You vote for people who actually do what you ask them to do. It's going to be fascinating. But we're back to this question. Theresa May in trouble yesterday with Andrew Marr, 4 times refusing to answer the question, did she know about the nuclear missile misfire, before asking the House of Commons to spend £40 billion on renewing Trident, and she would not answer. But is it right that Prime Ministers occasionally simply can't tell us the truth? And I wonder what Hanif in Chingford thinks of that situation.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello there.
Hi there. First time on, but
welcome.
Going to the question. Over the weekend, we've had a huge uproar about the alternative facts that were put by Sizer on or Spicer on from the press, the presidential press briefings.
We can, Hanif. I know that everyone wants to talk about Donald Trump, and I'm fascinated by Donald Trump and what's happening, and I will on Thursday dedicate the whole show to talking about Trump and Theresa and the chemistry and what can come from that meeting. But Hanif, can I just guide you back perhaps to where we are today, and talking about the way May dealt with that interview and whether she was right, in effect, to withhold the truth?
No, she wasn't. She was wrong. And that's why I was coming to that. At least they give us alternative facts. Theresa May did not give us any alternative facts. Once it's come out into the public domain, of course you can't, pass on, national security information. I agree with every single caller there.
Yep.
But what I do disagree with, and you know more than anybody else, how careful Theresa May has been in the transition to become Prime Minister, and now she's Prime Minister, however so careful she's been in answering questions, but also eloquent in not answering the questions. I don't think she should have avoided this question. It's out in the public domain. She should have given the public a yes or a no, right? And that would have at least give the public some element of trust in our leadership, where trust is eroding on a rapid scale. We've got our Prime Minister who is not answering the questions once they're out in the public.
So, Hanif, your point is it was out there anyway. The Sunday Times had it nailed on. And once it was out there, she should have basically come clean. That's the basic point you're making. And I get that. But let me ask you, what we're getting from Nicola Sturgeon and sort of a bit from Corbyn is that after the misfire in June, the country should have been told about it before parliamentary approval for an upgrade and in fact, a new Trident system was sought. Would you agree with that too?
Completely disagree with that. I mean, these are matters of national security, and you know as well as I do, about Sturgeon and about Corbyn. But at least our Prime Minister, in a time when there's a lack of trust within establishments around the world, at least we've got some alternative facts coming out across the pond. We've got no facts coming out, in our own country here by our leader, who should start to establish some degree of trust within the community.
So she's handled. So really, Hanif, she's handled it so badly that the public are losing a bit of confidence in her. That's really what you're saying, isn't it?
Exactly, and she didn't need to. And you know as well as I do that she's been too careful, and being too careful, she's trying to avoid all the risks. She's creating more risks for herself and for our country.
Hanif, you've made the point absolutely beautifully, and I hope you've enjoyed your first call on LBC. I wonder what Philip in Nottingham thinks.
Hi there. Firstly, Nigel, it's an honour to speak to you, and I'm still very proud to have been part of the Leave campaign. But I do think that we're all missing the point about this whole nuclear testing. I think we just need to look beyond the surface of what's happened. It's good old-fashioned power play. It's almost Cold War-esque in its style. Because we need to look strong in the face of the EU. We still need to look like a world power which has good resources. We need to build a new relationship with the US. And for me, it seems to be perfect timing. I mean, whoever's spinning in Downing Street is doing a pretty good job, I think.
Do you?
Yeah, I honestly, when I saw this, I thought they could have covered this up very, and put it away very quietly. But I think it's almost perfect timing that it's come out, and I think it's good old-fashioned power play. I really do.
Philip, interesting point of view. I'm not sure I buy into it, but it's an interesting point of view, and thank you. Facebook messages, Jay Carter says, quiet secrets when it comes to our national security are our best defence. If our enemies know everything, then we would be extremely vulnerable. And John Michael Shaw says on Facebook, it's not a preliminary test to see if it works, it's a test to see if it still works like it should. It didn't. The PM didn't bring that up during the debate, asked about whether they should plough another 40 billion into a new system. Well, actually, John Michael Shaw, that's not quite right, because modifications had been made to parts of a technical system. So I think it's fair to say that it was a test. Texts and tweets, I don't think it was wise to announce to the world and our potential enemies that our nuclear detergent misfired. Regards, Jeff. I think he meant deterrent, don't you? I hope he's blushing just a little bit. And a tweet, wasn't that why we had a test to see if it's safe or not, to see whether it works or not? A suggestion here by text, maybe we should make an app so that we can track all nuclear submarines and we can all be notified when they're being tested. Well, I love the sarcasm of that. And, of course, the point is that there are a lot of things about our national security, be it to do with our nuclear deterrent, be it to do with how our police forces deal with counter-terrorism. There are a lot of things at times that we simply can't be told, but that should not be an excuse for grand cover-ups on everything else as well. I wonder what Perry in Farnborough thinks about Theresa May's handling of this and whether it's right, not always, to tell us the truth.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello.
Hi. I kind of agree that, sometimes our Prime Minister doesn't have to tell the public everything. I mean, she's Prime Minister. It's a threat to our national security at the end of the day. But I do think she could have handled things slightly better. It's public facts, that you can go onto Google, you can get it up anywhere. It has failed testing a few times in the past, not since the 1990s, I believe. But if she'd have just come out with actual facts, saying since the Trident 2's been going, it has failed, I think it was 3.4 times out of all of its testing. If she'd have gone along the factual route, then she may have, the public may have actually have confidence in her still. And,
have you, Perry, let me ask you, do you feel that this Prime Minister is looking less competent today than she was yesterday morning?
Well, I voted Remain, but let's be fair, who voted for her in?
Well, that's a very good point. And maybe, who's to know, Perry, but maybe, given that Labour is in the most shocking mess, and given that there are two very challenging by-elections coming up, what would happen if Labour lost both of those seats? There could even be a May general election for Theresa May, and perhaps then she would really have legitimacy in the eyes of the public. Perry, I agree with you. She didn't handle it very well at all. Coming up, I'll be giving you my final thought on Theresa May's handling of the Trident missile test problem. But right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. I put it to you, between not telling the public everything in the national interest and outright lying. Now, I think it would have been very foolish at the time when this happened to advertise to the world that this hadn't worked as well as it ought to have done. But my friend Mr. Juncker, who of course is the boss of the European Union, he said a few years back, when it becomes serious, you have to lie. And what he was talking about was the defence of the euro and the European Union project. That, I think, is utterly despicable. And I think Tony Blair's reputation, frankly, has been trashed by the fact that he put together a very convoluted at best story in justifying the reasons for going to war in Iraq, telling us that we could be pulverised by Saddam in 45 minutes when that wasn't the case. What we're discussing here is something slightly different, and it is whether a Prime Minister has the right not always to tell us the truth. But I think in addition to that, we're also discussing, did the Prime Minister, given that this was out on the front page of the Sunday Times, handle this correctly? And I wonder what Simon in Cannock thinks. Simon, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How you doing?
I'm well. What do you think?
I'd love to ask you a bit of a broader question to do with the evasiveness that you see with politicians. Obviously, you've got a much better insight than most people we would have access to. Is there really a downside in the avoidance of questions? You know, because personally, when Theresa May laid out the Brexit talk last week, when she was quite open about the fact that, you know, I wasn't going to publicise some of these things, I just liked the answer because it was honest for once. It wasn't evasive, but most of the time it's just avoiding the question. And I just think the public would thoroughly respond to honesty. There's nothing wrong in saying, no, I was wrong, and there's nothing wrong in saying, I don't know.
Well, Simon, I think, frankly, what's happened is that as our politics has been more and more dominated by careerists, people who do politics for a living and perhaps couldn't do much else in the real world outside, that they're frightened of giving yes-no answers because they fear that current yes or no in the circumstances may not be popular with, you know, the next Facebook, the next focus group or whatever it might be. So you're right, we do. In fact, when we listen to politicians who say yes or no, we're actually quite shocked and surprised by it. And I agree with you. I think whether we agree with them, we like their honesty. So Theresa May got herself caught, I think, in a very, very difficult position. I'm also a bit worried, Simon, that she gave this big, strong speech last week, and I said, well, jolly good, well done. And we're now beginning to hear from Westminster today that perhaps on EU immigration, they're actually going to soften it. So that's the other problem, isn't it? We don't tend to get yes-no answers, and then sometimes if we do, they don't stick to what they've promised. And isn't that why, and I'm going to bring it back just for once, isn't that why, Simon, whether you like him or hate him, isn't Trump doing the right thing by carrying out his manifesto?
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I think so. You know, I think so. But this one, Simon, will run and run, and I thank you very much for your call. And I'm trying to rattle through some more Facebook messages. Marion Aitken says, as the testing featured an American-built missile, could Theresa May have been protecting American interests concerning the failure? Marion, you know, you may well here be bang on the money. I raised that point, did I not, at the top of the hour? You know, is the reason that originally we didn't talk about it when 4 years previously, and we tested a missile and shown a Royal Navy video, is the real reason that the Americans said, look, we're going to get this right because Trident is a joint project between the two of us. Marion, I suspect that one of the reasons that everyone tried to keep stum on this is the Americans would have wanted that too. The only question is, once it's out, and it's not really deniable, did she handle it the right way? I don't know. Tony Greenwich on Facebook says, far more important things to worry about. Clue is in the word test. Rather, it went wrong now than in a real defence scenario. What we need to do is to ensure that whatever wasn't right is corrected ASAP. Perfect common sense there from Tony Greenwich. Matthew in Heathrow, was she right or not?
Well, I think basically, I mean, as her being the Prime Minister, I would expect her to be given a list of questions. So I'm pretty certain the BBC journalist has just thrown it in, and that's why she didn't answer. And or if it wasn't just thrown in, she was wrong because she should have known what to say with it.
Yeah, I mean, Matthew, I'm a veteran of this. You know, the number of programmes that I've gone on to where there's a pre-agreed line of questioning, and that lasts for about 30 seconds. You know, try going on the Nick Ferrari show. You know, you find you could be asked anything. And that's the point, isn't it? If you're a party leader, a prime minister, you're going on a live primetime television or radio programme, actually, you know, you can be asked anything. And that's what surprises me, Matthew, is she literally appeared to be nonplussed by the question.
Yeah, that's what I think. Really, to get to the bottom, was she pre-warned about that question or not? So, but also, I'm surprised Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, I would guess. I mean, like the Queen kept informed about things privately. I would have guessed the shadow government will be informed as well.
Well,
so
Matthew,
why he's asking. That's
Matthew,
another question. Was he informed?
You raise a very interesting point that I can't get to the bottom of. So, when Michael Fallon was at the dispatch box today, or sorry, Sir Michael Fallon was at the dispatch box today, he said that the Labour Party were informed of this. Now, what did he mean? Did he mean, and it was Emily Thornberry who at the time was the Shadow Defence Secretary, did it mean that the Labour Party were informed that there was going to be a nuclear missile, albeit not armed, but a nuclear missile test? Or were they informed that it hadn't gone very well? And Matthew, before I came on air, I did my damnedest to try and find out the answer to that, and I don't know. That's the one part of this jigsaw that I simply cannot put together. Matthew, I don't know the truth of it, and I thank you for your view and for your call. And I'm going to go to Michael in Hampton. Michael, what do you think about Theresa May, or indeed Andrew Marr, asking all those questions?
Good evening, Nigel. Met you in Gravesend when you gave a speech. It was like trying to get close to a pop star. You were outside having a cigarette.
That sounds like me. Yes. Did I have a glass in my hand as well?
No, I think that I don't know whether you've signed the Official Secrets Act, but if you break it, you get 10 years in prison. And the reporter that did this with no real proof should be rooted out, and he should be said that you have contravened the Official Secrets Act, which he's done by trying to give away state secrets on our defence.
Well, I don't think Andrew Marr should be prosecuted for asking a question, no. I mean, you could argue... I'm sure the Sunday Times lawyers would have looked at this very, very carefully before going to print. Someone, somewhere, has leaked this. Someone, somewhere, has possibly, perhaps probably, broken the Official Secrets Act. But I can't agree, Michael. I think Marr... I think, given it was on the front page of the Sunday Times, I think Marr was in a reasonable position to answer that question. Would you
agree? But okay. But how do we know what the Sunday Times printed is correct?
Well, we don't quite know, and the Prime Minister could, of course, have cleared the air. I don't know. Just a little bit of... Michael, thank you. A little bit of feedback. Emily Thornberry received a letter from Fallon on confidential terms as part of normal protocol that the test was going to take place on the day. But he said nothing afterwards about it going wrong. That's a Labour source. We've just got that story in. So she was told the test was going to happen, but not perhaps that it hadn't gone as well as people would have liked. Well, my final thought on this is, yes, I do absolutely, completely accept that there are times when, in the interests of national security, there are times when we're dealing with terrorism or whatever it may be, that we have to have great faith, not just in our elected Prime Minister, but in our armed services, indeed in our police forces. I do absolutely accept that. And I can see that the Prime Minister was perhaps put in a very difficult spot by this story that was in the Sunday Times. Whether it was pre-agreed or not for the question to be asked, the fact is she handled it really very, very badly. And I think the absolute truth of it is that given that it was out anyway, and given there were no particular secrets involved, that it was a new submarine being tested, it would have been better yesterday for her to come clean. It would not have damaged our national security. Now, don't forget to tune in tomorrow, because the Supreme Court judges will deliver their verdict on whether Theresa May has sufficient authority to withdraw the UK from the European Union, or if Parliament must have a say in those plans. Don't miss it. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. Join me tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. But next up, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you, Nigel.